In this video, we will discover how to merge two or more meshes into a single object. Using this technique, we'll build a set of axes. We'll also use the same approach to create the illusion of two magnets moving in unison. When we begin to create the objects we want in our scene, a common approach is to start with an object such as a cube or sphere, and then enter Edit mode, where we can reshape the primitive by moving, rotating, scaling, deleting, or adding to its vertices, edges, or faces. But even working only in object mode, there are still some objects that we can construct often by joining two or more meshes together, so that they form a single object. As an example of this approach, we'll construct the three axes that make up an axis set, giving them the appearance of the axes we saw in the second video of this series. We'll start by switching to front view, and then creating a cylinder with its vertices set to 12, its radius to 2 centimeters, and its depth to 12 meters. Next, we'll add a cone setting its vertices to 12, radius 1 to 15 centimeters, and depth to 30 centimeters. We'll now press G, Z, and move the cone to the top of the cylinder. With the cone selected, we press Alt-D and Escape to create a cloned copy and leave it positioned in the same spot as the original. Next, we'll rotate this new cone by 180 degrees, about the X-axis, and move it to the bottom of the cylinder. And although we have now created the Z-axis of our axis set, it consists of three separate objects, two cones, and a cylinder. To join these items together so that Blender treats them as a single object, we need to start by selecting all three items and then pressing Ctrl-J. This joins them into a single unit. In the outliner editor, we'll see that what was three separate entries has been reduced to one. Its assigned name will be that of the last of the three objects to be selected. We'll rename it Z-axis. Just to convince ourselves that the three objects have merged into one, we'll deselect it by clicking in an empty space, then selecting it again and pressing G to move it. As we can see, it moves as a single entity. We'll press Ctrl-Z to undo the move. In Blender, the Z-axis is colored blue, so we'll select our object again, and after selecting the Materials page, in the Outliner editor, we'll add a new material to our Z-axis, selecting a blue color in the Base Color field. We'll rename the material Blue. If the axis doesn't turn blue in the 3D viewport, it's because we aren't in the correct display mode. We must make sure the setting is Material Preview or Rendered. To make sure our axis has its origin at its middle, we need to set Transform Pivot Point to Bounding Box Center, and then in the Object menu heading, select Set Origin and Origin to Geometry. We should see the axis orange dot at its center on the world origin. Next, we want to create a copy of the axis, but since we'll be assigning it a different color, we don't want the clone copy that pressing Alt-D would create. Instead, we need to press Shift-D to create an independent copy. We'll press Escape to stop the new object from moving. With the new object still selected, pressing R, Y, 90, Enter, we'll rotate it about the Y-axis so that it lies along the world X-axis. We made a copy of a blue axis, so it should be no surprise that the new one is also blue, since it will contain a copy of all the original's characteristics. But because we used Shift-D to make the copy, any changes we make to this copy won't affect the original. So, with the new axis object still selected, we need to select the Materials page in the Properties editor. Here we can see the blue material is indeed assigned to the new axis. With the material name selected, we need to click on the minus sign to remove that material from the object. Now we can click on New and add a red material. In the Outliner editor, we'll rename the new object X-axis. To create the final axis, we'll select the X-axis object, press Shift-D and Escape to make a copy. This time we need to press R, Z, 90, Enter to create the final axis. After removing its existing material, we'll create a new green one, renaming the material Green, and, in the outliner editor, renaming the latest object Y-axis. One final task is to join the three separate axes together to make a single object. After selecting all three objects, pressing Ctrl-J will perform the join, and we can go to the outliner editor and rename our object Axes Set. Notice that each of the axes has retained its own color. That is because we assigned their colors before linking them together. It would have been impossible to assign the three different colors after the join without working in edit mode. And notice that the origin of the object is at its exact center, since all three objects had their origins in the same spot. We'll save this project as Axes Set, since it may come in useful in later projects. Objects don't have to be physically touching to be joined. For example, the next scene represents a real-world setup where two magnets are separated from each other by a board. If one magnet moves, so should the other. The simplest way to create this situation in Blender is to join the two magnets so that they form a single object. Now, when we appear to move only one magnet, the other moves too. In reality, this is because what looks like two separate magnets to the casual observer is actually a single object. Of course, our illusion only works if the magnets don't move past the edge of the board.